Hello, very good evening. It's 8:03 on LBC. I like to think that my programme over the years has given a very fair coverage to the Liberal Democrats, which I think in some cases elsewhere on the media that isn't always the case. So when it was announced that what the timetable was for the Lib Dem leadership election, I wanted to take that very seriously because they are the third biggest party in British politics in electoral. Well, actually, they're not, are they? They're the fourth because if you include UK-wide, obviously the SNP has more seats.
Not in terms of votes.
Not in terms of votes.
We beat the SNP in terms of votes.
I stand corrected. But anyway, I think it is really important because at times, I think in 2015, everyone thought we were going back to two-party politics. You could say we have done, but of course with the SNP involved, and then of course the Brexit Party. But the Liberal Democrats, they have. There are times in their existence when they have proved very, very popular. If you remember, under Charles Kennedy, they got, 62 seats in a general election. Now, they're a long way off that, but you never know what might happen at the next election. So over the next couple of weeks on this programme, we're going to be talking to both of the candidates, each for an hour. We've got Ed Davey with us today, Layla Moran next Tuesday, and then on Sunday, the 2nd of August, we're hosting a head-to-head debate between the two of them. So I think we've more than met our required broadcasting time.
Iain, can I actually thank you for that? I mean, you have always been generous and courteous to us, and it's great to be on the show. Thank you for coming in specially for this.
Well, I have done because I think this sort of thing you kind of need to. I need to look you in the eye, don't I? So let's start off with the interview. I think your weakness in this contest is that you were a cabinet minister in the coalition. And I think there are many people in your party who think we need a break, we need a fresh start. Do you see that as something that you've kind of got to get over in order to win?
I don't actually. If you look at the general election review that we undertook after the 2019 defeat, which was extremely thorough, and most people have said they're quite surprising that we've been so thorough, the coalition hardly gets a mention. There's 61 pages, there's many conclusions and many recommendations. It talks about the many problems that the Liberal Democrats have, and I'll be happy to talk about the many challenges that we face. But the coalition isn't one of them in that review. It talks about how we've got to improve our campaigning, how we've got to improve our governance, how we've got to be more relevant to people, how we need to make sure people understand what Liberal Democrats mean. That's why I'm standing on a ticket of a greener, fairer, more caring society. But it's not about the coalition. And what's really interesting, if you look at the facts, Vince Cable, who was a coalition cabinet minister for 5 years, more than my 3, when he led the party in May 2019, we got our best ever local elections and European results. So the idea that it's all about that, it's just factually not true.
I agree with you. I think from the electorate's point of view, it isn't about that. But from your own party's point of view, it is. And when you're
that's a very interesting point. It's the voters that should matter.
Well, it is. But in this election, you need to know your selectorate. And your selectorate is Liberal Democrat members. And I don't know if any polling's been done on this, but I would venture to suggest that the majority of Liberal Democrat members possibly aren't as enamoured with the record of the coalition as you might be.
Do you know what? I'm not even sure that's true. I've been talking to lots of Lib Dem members across the country, listening to their views. And what they tell me is that they actually like what I achieved personally as Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. The fact that I nearly quadrupled, underestimating, nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power. I had to fight George Osborne for that. You'll recall that. I had to fight Eric Pickles. They didn't like what I was doing. But I won. And I won and transformed Britain's electricity industry. You see reports that coal has come off the system. That happened because of the actions that I took as cabinet minister. And when you think about the Liberal Democrat policy going forward in 2024, we want to talk about green jobs, the green economy, green power, green homes, green transport. And that green message that I'm so passionate about, I've got real credibility on. And actually, I've heard members saying, well, the great thing about you, Ed, isn't you just talk about it, you've done it.
But you also have some baggage there, don't you, on nuclear power, because your stance on nuclear power is at variance with your party's stance.
It's not. No, it's not. I mean, what I did on nuclear power is I exposed the costs. And I was in a coalition.
No, but you were in favour of it.
Well, I was in a coalition with a coalition agreement, which the parties supported, which gave the pass to nuclear power. But what I did was I ensured that nuclear power had to face its true economics. So it had to face the cost of decommissioning. It had to face the cost of nuclear waste management. We managed to transfer the risk to the private sector. So when nuclear power stations overrun and go over budget, as they always do, it wasn't the taxpayer or the consumer. And that exposed the true costs of nuclear. And that is one of the reasons why nuclear is not going to be the future. What is going to be the future is renewables, because I got the cost of renewables down.
You used to argue that nuclear power should be included in the basket of sort of energy sources.
Listen, many climate change people and activists are worried about making sure we get rid of coal and fossil fuels. And there were some very strong climate change activists who said that, while renewables were expensive, we should look at the nuclear option. But what I'm so proud of is we got the price of renewables down dramatically. So, when I first took office, offshore wind was way more expensive than nuclear. £160 per unit of electricity compared to £90 for nuclear. Thanks to the policies that I put in, it's now less than 40, while nuclear hasn't gone down. So therefore, the case for renewables now as the electricity source for tackling climate change has been made, and I achieved that. So I'm quite proud of that.
Now
actually.
You are pandering to the Liberal Democrats electorate because you're trying to make you're trying to make out that you're not quite as in favour of nuclear power as you used to be. Are you as in favour of fracking as you used to be?
I was a minister in the coalition government, and I had to go along with the Tory policies but not implement them properly. And I achieved that in nuclear. I exposed the cost of nuclear. And unfracking, here's another one. They wanted to frack everywhere. They'd have fracked every piece of grass in the UK if they'd had their chance. David Cameron was gagging for fracking.
That's a ridiculous thing to say.
I'm just giving you how the pressure I faced. And what I did was I consulted, got the experts in, and I put forward a regulation on earthquakes. So if there's a seismic shock when you're fracking, you now have to stop fracking. And I put it in with a traffic light system so that if you went above 0.5 on the Richter scale, you had to stop. That regulation has stopped fracking in our country. So you're looking at the person who's done most to stop fracking. I'm very proud.
I'm looking at the person who actually allowed it to happen.
No, it didn't. Well, it's not happened, has it? Iain, tell me. Iain, no, that's factually wrong. Tell me how much fracking has happened.
You implemented a law that allowed fracking has happened. Well, not a lot.
Exactly.
But you implemented a law that allowed it to happen, and you could have said, as Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, I won't allow this to happen. You could have done that, couldn't you?
Let's stand back. Renewables in this country have more than quadrupled now. I signed more contracts for solar and wind farms than any British politician. We are now a world leader in offshore wind. That's a fact that's happened.
So will you give Boris Johnson some credit for that then? Because it's 5 years since you left office.
Yeah, but they've been opening the wind farms that I signed the contract for because it takes a while to build. So they haven't built as many as they ought to have done. So actually the credit is mine. But on fracking and nuclear, what I did was I exposed the weaknesses. I exposed the weakness of nuclear, so it's very expensive. And guess what? Not one nuclear power station has yet been completed. And the future of nuclear is in doubt, not the future of renewables. And fracking, there's been almost no fracking. And that's because of the regulation that I passed. Politics, Iain.
You could have banned it. You could have banned it. Some countries have banned it.
You couldn't in the coalition because the Tories wouldn't have allowed it to. And politics is the art of the possible. So when you're using experience and judgment, which is an issue in this leadership campaign, when I use my experience and judgment, what did I do? Massive renewable revolution, and we stopped nuclear and fracking in their tracks, despite being in a coalition with the Tories. I call that an all-out victory.
What do you think of JK Rowling's position on trans women?
I don't agree with it.
Why?
Because I think trans women are women and trans men are men.
Do you think that trans women who haven't undergone surgery should be allowed in women's toilets, for example? Yes. You do?
Yeah, I believe, listen...
And you're happy for trans women,
the Liberal Democrats...
Pre-op trans women in women's prisons as well?
Yeah, because I think some of the arguments that are put against this are just don't understand the facts and the experience. Trans people are some of the most discriminated against in our society. They suffer violence, they suffer harassment... And if you're in favour of equality, as I am, I'm in favour of equality for everyone in the LGBT plus community and everyone in the black and ethnic minority community. No holds barred. One of the reasons I'm a liberal is because I want to treat every individual with respect. And that's why I'm afraid I disagree with JK Rowling.
What about the women who do not think that this is right, that they feel threatened, their space feels threatened by the presence of a man in a woman's loo with a penis?
Well, listen, I've spoke to constituents who have that view. I've listened to them, and I've listened to them with respect and patience. I don't agree with them, and I've been clear about why I don't agree with them. Because in politics, guess what? There's often disagreement. But you have to stand for your principles. And I'm very, very strong on the equality principle. I always have been. I moved Section 28 to get rid of the homophobic, it was introduced by Conservatives, piece of legislation. I'm very proud. It's one of my proudest moments in politics to move the measures that got rid of the homophobic Section 28.
You hit the headlines this week with your question to Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's Questions on the idea that there should be an immediate public inquiry into what's happened on coronavirus. Now, doesn't logic dictate that you have the inquiry once it's over, or at least almost over? And it isn't almost over now, is it?
Well, I actually think we do need an immediate inquiry for a whole set of reasons. First of all, the people who be involved in that inquiry aren't the ones who are really in the front line combating coronavirus and helping patients who are suffering. There are a small number of politicians and officials. So I think Boris Johnson's argument against an immediate inquiry is completely wrong. Moreover, we've got to learn the lessons fast. Other countries have already set up inquiries. Other countries have managed to do it. And they've got, quite tight timetables because they want to make sure that they do learn the lessons, they do learn from the mistakes as quickly as possible, because it could be a second wave. I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister at long last committed to the principle of a independent inquiry. I'm glad I managed to get that out of him.
Because he hadn't said that before, had he?
He was, I was...
He hinted at it, but hadn't actually quite said it.
To be honest, I'll be frank with you here, I was a bit surprised I got that out of him.
So was I.
But I've been pushing and pushing. I led the charge on this, and I eventually scored a goal, and I'm pleased about that. But he's still not put down a timetable. And I've written to him, and I've said, we need a timetable. The grieving relatives, the family and friends of the tens of thousands of people who died, they want this inquiry. Our country needs this inquiry. And so I've said, look, give us a timetable. Tell us who the chair should be. Give us the draft terms of references. Make it clear that it's going to be under the 2005 Inquiries Act, which gives real power and real teeth to the inquiry. And I've yet to have an answer. But I'll be pushing that, because the answer now, he's agreed to the principle of it, we need to know when, and as soon as possible.
You see, I would say it's impossible to know when it can start, because it's a bit like if you had said in 2003 we should start the inquiry into the Iraq War now, before really anybody had any sight of when the whole issue would come to an end. No one would have thought that was sensible.
Well, Boris Johnson did. Boris Johnson in October...
Well, he may have been wrong.
Well, he may have been wrong. I don't think he was. Actually, I voted with him in the same lobbies in October 2003 for an independent inquiry into the Iraq War. And the reason is this, Iain. I think you're making a classic mistake. The reality is the big decisions on going to war, on how we deal with something like this pandemic, are at the beginning, and indeed before the beginning, and the lead up to it. So one of the big questions on the coronavirus inquiry is, why weren't we better prepared? There was in 2016, there was the Cygnus exercise, the simulation of a pandemic. It didn't report in public, unfortunately, but it set forward a whole set of recommendations, and the government didn't follow them. If they had, we'd have been in a much better place. We'd have had the PPE. We'd have had more critical care beds, more critical care staff. And so, the inquiry can start looking at these issues, and it can start looking at them now.
Do you think that any inquiry should actually point the finger just at political decision makers as to what went wrong? Or do you think it is quite reasonable to look at a lot of the advice that was given, which politicians obviously had to then use to make their decisions on? Because, if you look at lockdown, it was clear that I think it's clear, would probably agree that we locked down a week or 10 days too late. Now, I should be fascinated to know why that happened. And because rumour is that SAGE weren't recommending that we lock down, so the government didn't do it. And once they did, the government then did do it. So do you then blame this amorphous group of scientists for the fact that they didn't give clear advice, the fact that there hasn't been clear advice on face masks? That's all that politicians can go on, isn't it?
Well, listen, inquiries aren't just about blame, right? Let's be
clear.
They
partly are.
Well, yeah, they partly are, but let me be clear what an inquiry is about, particularly as it impacts the lives of, we've had all these people who've died. We've had a dramatic economic impact. It's affecting the whole of society. People need to be clear why we need an inquiry and what that would do. The first thing it would do is establish the facts. And people might think that's odd, but we don't know all the facts, actually. So let's establish the facts, compare it with other countries and all the rest of it. So let's get the facts. The second thing is let's get the lessons. Forget blame for the moment. What can we learn from this? I mean, it's been dramatic. It's the most catastrophic thing in our lifetimes. And we've got to learn the lessons, whether it's about preparation, whether it's about how you take decisions during it, about how you prepare the economy, so learn the lessons. The third thing is about the blame. And to answer your question directly, of course, anybody who was involved in this needs to have to be held to account. I personally think government ministers are going to be the ones who have got to answer the most questions because they ignored the advice of the 2016 pandemic simulation. They didn't implement the recommendations. And Boris Johnson and other ministers were given those recommendations and they didn't implement them. And then there's obviously the lockdown issue you talk about, the testing, the PPE. So it's not just about blame. It's about facts. It's about learning lessons. But crucially, it's about happening soon. And I was delighted when I got the Prime Minister on the record yesterday to admit this is the right way forward, but he's got to get a move on. He's got to think about the relatives. He's got to think about our economy. He's got to think about making sure we learn the lessons fast.
What lessons have you learned from the failures of Tim Farron and Jo Swinson?
I think we've got to be clearer in our messaging.
She was very clear that on Brexit, wasn't she?
She was, but we need to be clear about what the Liberal Democrats stand for. And the problem with the Brexit message, which I totally supported, by the way, so I'm not resiling from it, was the only message we got over. And, Brexit isn't an issue, may not be an issue in 10, 20 years' time. And, I remember the 2005 election, that we fought it on the Iraq War. We were right, again, but we didn't get our overall messages over. So what I want to do for the party, my hero is Paddy Ashdown, and this is what he did. He made sure that there was people knew what we were about. We were about the environment. We were about education. We were about Europe. He got a very clear message. And so in this leadership election, I'm talking about a greener, fairer, more caring society. And if I am elected leader, I'll be on your show, or hopefully week in, week out, because I love talking to you, Iain, talking about the green economy, about social justice, and about caring. And caring, by the way, is something that I don't think any other leadership candidates ever talked about, because I think it's a big issue for the future.
It's interesting you mentioned carers, because a lot of politicians rightly pay tribute to all the work that care workers have done throughout this crisis. Do you think they should all get a pay rise now?
Yes, I do.
Because at the moment, most of them are on minimum wage. They have to pay a lot of their own expenses as well, which seems to me to be a scandal.
The way we treat people who care for our loved ones in care homes and other places, and actually the way we treat unpaid carers, is really pathetic and intolerable. We have got to give a better deal for carers. I speak with a degree of passion about this. My father died when I was 4. My mother became terminally ill when I was 12, and I was a young carer till she died when I was 15. I then was looked after my grandparents, then my nana, she became frail, and I was her carer for nearly a decade. And now I'm a carer for my disabled son, who can't walk or talk. So I know a lot about caring. And I know from my work as a carer for my loved ones, I know what other people go through. And there are 10 million carers out there, 6 million who are completely unpaid, despite working hours for the loved ones. And I just think we need to be a more caring society. I think we need to support carers. And I've got packages and ideas in my new deal for carers, which would make a big difference for them.
And that is a big part of your leadership campaign. I completely get that. But it has been pointed out that in 2013, when you were a minister, you voted to cut the funding for carers' allowances by freezing out 10,000 unpaid carers from receiving it in 2013. Now, you can't just put that down to, oh, well, I was a minister, so I had to do it.
Well, in government, you raise your concerns, and I had many, and I raised those concerns very, very hard, and some of them I won on. I didn't win on all of them. And all governments make mistakes and make errors. And one of the reasons I'm campaigning so hard on carers for the future is I was cross at the time. I remain cross.
But you didn't have to vote for it. You could have found a subsequent engagement, couldn't you? We know how parliamentary voting works. You didn't have to be there to vote for that one.
You're right. We do know how parliamentary works, and if you're a minister, you've got to turn up. So listen, the reality is, I had to take some difficult decisions in that government. I was with the Tories. I fought them and I beat them on lots of different issues. But I've learned from that. And the thing I've learned is that we really need to make the argument hard and strong about carers. And if this COVID pandemic has taught us anything, it's that the NHS and social care need to be seen together. When Boris Johnson said, let's protect the NHS, everyone said, well, that's okay. But he forgot the care homes. And look at the tragedy in our care homes. And he didn't get them the PPE, didn't get them the testing. People were let out of hospital who were testing positive for COVID. There was a story in one of the papers this week which showed a cacophony of mistakes by the NHS, which led to some of the tragedies in our care homes. We've got to learn from that.
Okay. Right, well, let's leave that aside. I mentioned Tim Farron earlier. I want to move on to the subject of donations because having worked on David Davis's leadership campaign back in 2005, and I had to handle the donations, so that I kind of get that these things are always quite difficult. But I think Tim Farron has come out as a supporter of yours. He's accepted £75,000 from an evangelical group, despite them being in favour of gay conversion. I find that quite shocking that a Liberal politician can accept money from a campaign group that believes that gay conversion therapy is in any way okay. What's your view?
Well, I'm completely against gay conversion therapy.
Do you think he should hand the money back?
Listen, let me just deal with that question first. I have already said to you on this interview that I am robust in my support for equality. And I think the way the LGBT plus community have been treated over many years is unacceptable. I will campaign for equality for all LGBT plus people. It will be a symbol of my leadership. I've got a very strong track record on it, and I will continue to campaign for equality for everybody, because that's what Liberal Democrats are about.
Can you put on record what you think about the fact that one of your senior MPs, a former party leader, has accepted £75,000 from a group that believes in gay conversion therapy?
Well, let's be clear. Tim Farron doesn't believe in gay conversion therapy. He's really clear about that. And this think tank that he's getting money for, I believe, is doing some work that he strongly supports. So I don't think it's for me to throw stones.
In terms of other donations, you've apparently, according to Private Eye today, you've raised more than £62,000 in donations for your leadership campaign, double what Layla Moran has. What is that spent on?
It's been on literature, primarily.
Isn't that a bit 1990s?
Welcome to the Liberal Democrats. No, it's 2020s. No, the reality is this: we have 120,000 members, a record number of members. I'm really proud that party's got so many members, and people think it's all social media these days. Well, actually, a small number of Liberal Democrat activists and members are on social media, and therefore the only way you can reach them is by coming on wonderful shows like LBC, and please invite me back in. I love being with you, but also through leaflets. It's a tried and tested method, but sending leaflets to 120,000 people costs a lot of money.
But you're getting donations from private healthcare providers, I see.
Well, there's a gentleman called Justin Ash who's been a donor to the National Party. His donations helped fund campaigns for Layla and myself at the last general election. He is a committed Liberal Democrat. He believes in our pro-European position, our position in tackling social injustice, our position on promoting a much better and more effective caring society. So I think I completely reject any criticism from that angle.
And you've had £5,000 from Sir Michael Rake, who's a board member of Huawei.
Sir Michael Rake was the president of the CBI.
He was indeed, but he's also a board member of Huawei. Doesn't that make you feel a little bit queasy?
No, listen, Huawei, up until very recently, had been welcomed in by the Conservative government. Huawei had been investing in Britain because the Conservative government said, do come on in. They've changed their mind.
Have you?
I don't think Huawei now meet up to the security standards that we need. And to be honest, as a Liberal Democrat, one of my biggest concerns, which you've got to work this through, it's really very serious, with China as a growing power, is how we deal with it when it is a growing security threat, particularly on cyber security, and there are huge amounts of human rights abuses, and we've seen what's happened in Hong Kong. It's a very serious issue. I don't think we should limit it to Huawei, actually. I think we've got to go across the board.
Ed Davey is with us. He's the acting co-leader of the Liberal Democrats. And we'll go to your calls now. Richard is a new caller in Tottenham. Hello, Richard.
Hi.
Hello, what would you like to ask?
I just want to ask. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Richard.
Hiya. Are you good? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you very much.
Get on with it, Richard, come on.
The question is, you've been acting leader longer than Jo Swinson was actually leader, and have overseen a halving of your party's poll rating. What makes you think that would improve if you were leader?
Well, listen, we've had a really bad election, didn't we? And because we had a bad election, it's been difficult to get coverage and add COVID on top of that. But we've seen polls going from 6 to 10% actually in recent times. And, if you look at how we did between 2015 and, in fact, the spring of 2019, we were at similar levels. And the question is, how do we get out of that? And you get out of that, Richard, by winning council elections, by winning parliamentary by-elections, by winning in Scotland and Wales and London, massive elections in May 2021. So my strategy for turning around the party's fortunes, and it's quite a long strategy, I won't give you the whole bit.
No, please
don't. But it's about campaigning and winning. And I've been a campaigner.
You were deputy leader in the last election campaign, weren't you? You can't absolve yourself of responsibility for what happened.
Well, the whole party takes responsibility, and we had the general election review, which I set up, and no one can claim we pulled our punches and we published it, and it's pretty strong. And I want to implement those recommendations. And if we implement the Thornhill recommendations, which I know I was very much involved in creating that review, if we implement them, I think we can start winning elections. And when we start winning elections, Richard, our poll ratings goes up. I'll give you one example, a very recent one. When we won the Richmond Park by-election in 2017 election, our poll rating had been going around what it is now, and then it jumped to 12% just on the back of winning a parliamentary by-election. And the history of the Liberal Democrats over many years has been that's been the case.
But
let's win elections.
It evaporates, doesn't it? Because you did really well in the European elections and the local elections in 2019, and then 6 months later, it all went to pieces.
Yeah, but there's a big story behind that, isn't there? And you're right. Listen, 2019 was a pretty bad election for us. But I've been in the party 30 years, an MP for 20. I've seen elections where we've won parliamentary by-elections, we've won council elections, and far from evaporating, we've increased. So take Paddy Ashdown. When he was leader, he's my hero in the party, let's be clear about it. But we'd go into elections, on 12%, on 11%, and we end up at 16, 70%, and winning lots of seats. Surely that's what we want to do, win lots of seats, beat the Tories and get rid of them from government.
Of course that's what you want to do.
And we can do it.
Now, how can I say this kindly?
Yeah.
People see... Paddy Ashdown was a very charismatic leader. People see you as a bit dull, I'm afraid. Do you not recognise? And they look at Layla Moran and they think, well, she might be a bit of a risk, but at least there might be a bit of fun on the way, and they don't see that with you.
Well, I'm not sure politics should be about fun. I think it's a serious business. And I'm proud of some of the things I've already achieved, and I want to achieve more. There's not many politicians who can sit in front of you and say they need quadrupled renewable power, and because of my actions, coal is coming off the grid. Very few Lib Democrats could say no one could. And also, let me tell you,
boring answer, though, isn't it?
Well, I think you're tackling climate change.
Aren't you just another sort of boring knight, a sort of Keir Starmer light?
Well, listen, in Parliament yesterday, I stood up. And I think, hopefully quite statesmanlike, put a question to the Prime Minister. And I think he said something he didn't intend to say, of national significance. And he committed to the principle of a independent inquiry into COVID, which he'd not said before. And you might think that's boring. I think that's effective.
Okay. All right. Must keep remembering that this half an hour is about the callers and not my questions. Richard, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard.
Reese is in Watford. Reese, what would you like to ask?
Oh, hello, Ian. Hello,
Hi.
Ed.
Hi, Reese.
Hello, Ed. We've talked before. I'm not just a member, I'm also a campaigner for your leadership campaign.
Thank you.
I'd
This
like
will be
to
a
ask you
difficult question,
an important question regarding foreign policy. You were mentioning China earlier. Would you agree that we, as a country, dramatically need to rethink our foreign policy towards China, not just regarding Hong Kong or the COVID-19 cover-up, but the monstrous treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China by the Chinese state? Would you support up to including imposing sanctions on China for its human rights violations?
Well, I certainly think we need to think very seriously about the human rights violations that happen in China year in, year out. I'm very proud that Liberal Democrats have led the campaigns on this, not just on Hong Kong, as you say, but actually on Uyghurs. It's my colleague Alistair Carmichael, who's our chief whip, who's actually led the parliamentary campaign on this. So Liberal Democrats have been at the forefront already. How we go about that is the critical task. One of the reasons why Liberal Democrats have supported the government position on Huawei is because Huawei technology is used in some of the camps that imprison the Muslims in the Western province, the Uyghur Muslims, and are therefore complicit in the human rights abuses that we see there. So we've got to be strong on this, Reece. I couldn't agree more. I think actually Liberal Democrats have got a very strong record on it, and we've got to work through with our European neighbours, by the way, a much stronger policy. I'm pretty worried, Reece, about the way Donald Trump is going about recalibrating the relationship with China. I don't think that's the right approach, but I think an approach ideally across Europe where we say to the Chinese, if you want to come into the world, if you want to do the trading, if you want to be this big power, you've got to sort out the way you treat individuals.
Quick comeback?
I do absolutely agree. I mean, it did struck me that how Jeremy Corbyn was willing to sit down with President Xi, but not President Trump. It did strike me of a massive hypocrisy, because I'm actually supporting a presenter on this programme, Majid Nawaz, and he's also a former Liberal Democrat candidate who's currently on a hunger strike regarding this issue. I just wanted to leave it because it is very woefully underreported in Western media, and that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention here.
Well, thank you, and I will talk to Alistair Carmichael and pass on your thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Reece, thank you very much indeed. Can I just point out a little documentary that I did for LBC last September, I think it is. You can find it on my website, or just Google Iain Dale Uyghur Muslims, because I wasn't aware of what was going on until we did that documentary, and it is absolutely shocking what China is doing. Right, let's go back to another caller. Rachel's a new caller in Haringey. Hello, Rachel. Rachel, are you there?
Hello.
Hi.
I am, yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
What would you like to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Jo Swinson got a lot of flack from Ed as well for saying that she was going to be the next Prime Minister during the 2019 election. And yet Ed's been saying it at hustings as well. So is he wrong to say it as as she did?
I haven't been saying that at hustings in this leadership election, Rachel. I can't remember saying that at all. But the last leadership election, I did say it at one or two hustings, that is true, but not at this leadership election. And I would have also made the distinction, Rachel, between the internal party discussions that you're doing to G up the troops and get that ambition going, and then how you manage it. And, I didn't actually criticise Jo at the time. In fact, I like to think in the leadership election with Jo, we fought a very friendly one. We were actually very good friends. And when I lost, I was a very loyal deputy. I didn't always agree with her, but my job was to disagree in private and then to support her in public. And I think you'll see from the record that's exactly what I did.
When was the last time you talked to her?
Oh, about 2 weeks ago, I think.
Getting advice on leadership campaigns?
Well, Jo is always someone worth it. I hope she comes back into mainstream politics. She's such a talent.
Rachel, you wanted to come back?
I was just going to say that he was actually criticising her after the election and during the election review, not during the campaign,
That's right.
leadership campaign.
Yeah, and to be fair, I've been much less critical than Layla has of Jo, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
OK, well, we'll broach that with Layla when we see her next Tuesday. Rachel, thank you very much for that. Dakota is in Northamptonshire, if you see what I mean. Hello, Dakota.
I was wanting to ask Ed how he feels about affordable housing and whether or not he feels that we should be expanding on government-subsidised affordable renting.
Thank you, Dakota. I absolutely think we should. I think housing is one of those issues which affects social justice, frankly. I do a lot of advice surgeries for my constituents, have done over 20 years, and homelessness, overcrowding, people's unable to afford, even basic housing in the areas they were brought up, is a massive issue. And frankly, I've come to the conclusion a few years ago that the only way forward is to build more social housing and more council housing. Sometimes
I completely agree.
Good.
I've been doing a lot of research myself into the Help to Buy programs and whatnot, and seem to see that there seems to be a popular opinion that people who actually own their houses as opposed to renting them are less likely to move for other forms of work.
Uh-huh.
So I was thinking that having more social housing would also be more prosperous to our economy because people would be more likely to move to more profitable jobs.
But the thing is, nobody's really disagreeing on that. If I had a Conservative and Labour spokesman or woman in the studio, they would all agree with you. What can you do to differentiate the Liberal Democrats on housing policy from the other two?
Well, I think we should be really strong on making sure that publicly owned land is used. I've argued this for a long time. The government have failed to ensure that the public land that we own, it's often in the NHS and defence, they're the big landowners. That's not being used as much as it should for council housing. I've got to make a confession to you, Iain. My wife is a councillor. She's a councillor in Kingston. She has the housing portfolio holder, and she's building a lot of council housing. So we talk a lot about this issue, see the challenges facing councils of all political colours. That is fair. One of the things I'm so proud of what she's doing is she's not only trying to build more council houses, but trying to make sure that they are environmentally friendly. So we're going as strong as we can on those critical environmental regulations. OK,
Dakota, thank you very much indeed. Chris is in Richmond. Now, Chris is a regular caller to this programme. Okay. He is a Liberal Democrat, but he's been slightly charmed by Keir Starmer, he told me in a recent call. Aren't you, Chris?
Well, I am, but I'm not planning to leave at the moment because I've got a brilliant MP in Manila Wilson and great council.
Yeah.
We've got two great...
Here's another friendly one.
No, actually, my question isn't going to be a softball for a pitch to the boundary. So, Ed, thanks for taking the question. So the question I've got is, how are you going to keep the party as a broad church when 30% of us voted leave? I'm not one of them, by the way, and not every member signs up to every social policy.
Well, Chris, thanks for the question. I mean, I think that we have been a broad church over the years. We've not always agreed on everything. It'd be worrying, frankly, if we did. And I am really keen on fostering internal debate. The key thing is, though, when you disagree with someone, if you've sort of lost the vote and you've lost the argument in whatever forum it is, it could be the party, it could be party conference, it could be the local party, then the question is, do you accept that and then work with your colleagues? And, over the years in the party, I've been on the losing side of things, I've been on the winning side of things. But what unites us as Liberal Democrats, our passionate belief in tackling the environment, our passionate belief in human rights and internationalism, our desire for social justice, our support for civil liberties, our support for healthy local democracy, all those things that unite us bring us together after healthy discussion. So I would want to keep that. I think that's been our strength in the past.
Chris?
Well, I guess I think you're right, but I've noticed on social media things like the Gender Recognition Act causes fierce debate. Some of the language used on both sides has been not particularly pleasant. I also still worry, for example, that the party's policy is to abolish faith schools, which in an area like Twickenham, we've got some brilliant Catholic schools, and I'm Catholic myself, I find worrying. I think we need to appeal to people, like being the people that go to my church, that knock on doors for Manira Wilson to deliver leaflets, but they'd be told that their kids can't go to a faith school. I just wonder whether we've got a head screwed on sometimes, to be honest with you, as a party.
Well, I mean, let's take the faith school issue, because I have some sympathy with what you say. I'm not against new faith schools in the sense that the church, be it Catholic or the C of E, controls the entry, because I believe that our schools need to allow everybody to go from that area. If they have a faith ethos, actually, as long as it's a multi-faith ethos, not exclusive, then I have no problem with an ethos. And I do share some concerns, and I have voiced these, that if we get into a situation where effectively we'll be closing down existing faith schools, I think that could be a problem.
But is that your party's policy at the moment?
Well,
Chris seems to think it is.
Well, I think it's a little bit more liberal than Chris is suggesting.
But it sounds as if you might be going to persuade your party to veer away from that kind of attitude.
No, we've had many debates in the party on faith schools, to be fair, and we've changed position and nuances over the years. So I don't think it's a sort of dramatic ideological issue that we should get.
Are you religious yourself?
Yeah, I'm a Christian.
Do you go to church?
Yes, I do, but not as often as my wife does, to be fair. I go to St Andrews St Mark's in Surbiton. I'm a Church of England follower, which is a very, very, very liberal church.
It's really interesting the way you're answering this question, because it's so typical of we British not to want to talk about our personal faith or religion, whereas in America, if you're a politician, you shout about it front and centre, don't you?
Yeah, I think there is a difference there. You're absolutely right. But I've certainly never hid my religion. I'm very proud of it.
But you're not quite as religious as Tim Farron, though.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a religious measurement here going on. I have a different brand of Christianity. Let's say
you're not an evangelical.
No.
Chris, thank you. Let's go to Brian, who's in Washington in Tyne and Wear. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Ian.
Hello.
I'm disillusioned with politicians, and I've said this to the researcher just a minute ago there, right? Unless we get to grips with allowing people just to walk into the country, i.e. people coming in from France on boats, landing on our shores, and we should be turning them all back straight away. It doesn't matter what colour they are, whether they're white, orange, black, purple, or whatever. They shouldn't just be allowed to just morph into someone's country, and that's why we've got all these social issues, like housing issues. You know, if it was so easy for me, I would love to walk into Australia tomorrow, just land on their shore and think, I'm an immigrant, I want to stay here, but I can't because I've got tough laws and we need to adopt. You know, all the politicians need to wake
so
up.
what's your question, Brian?
I'm disillusioned with politicians. That's why I've never voted for Labour for the last 10 years. I didn't vote for nobody. Okay. And I'm not right-wing or anything. I'm just a realist. And instead of building loads of council houses, there's loads of properties in the middle of town centres now because all the big department stores are shutting down. They should be converted into houses.
All right. Well, let's take that first issue. What would you do about the people coming over from France on boats?
Well, one has to make sure whether they're illegal immigrants or not.
Well, they must be if they're coming over on boats. Otherwise, why wouldn't they do it in a different way?
I think the international law, which we are signatories to, requires the government to check whether they are asylum seekers who are escaping from tyranny and persecution and so on. And I think it's incumbent on a country to check that first. However, but
they're on a boat, you can't check them.
Well, when they land or before they...
But surely you shouldn't... You should be trying to turn them back before they get here, shouldn't you? Otherwise you're encouraging more to come.
Well, what we did have before is we had a very good arrangement with the French. And the French and ourselves were cooperating, if you remember. And this sort of thing wasn't happening. I think that cooperation with the French has broken down.
That's not what the governments say. They say that they're getting marvellous cooperation from the French.
Yeah, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But they're not telling the truth. The reality is, I think post-Brexit, those sorts of cooperations that we used to have and used to enjoy are going to be reduced. And it's one of the costs of Brexit, actually. And the fact that the Tories tried to say, well, Brexit will solve all these problems, actually, in some regards, is going to make them worse.
Okay.
We need to stick to our international obligations.
Let's try and get two more questions in. Richard is in Finsbury Park. Richard, what's your question, please?
Hello, Ed. Yeah, it's a two-part question, really. First of all, do you really stand by the election campaign that involved saying a profane word, addressing Brexiters with something, saying something to Brexit?
I think we can say it at 3 minutes to 9, can't we? I'm looking at my... No, he's saying no, I can't say it.
No.
The word that begins with B and sounds like Grolux.
Yes. And secondly, Sir Ed, I think what was particularly insulting about that was, if it's one thing that the pandemic has proved, is that people like Migration Watch have been right to say that over the years we can't cope with extra immigration, and we've had 5 million people over the last 15 years. Now, if clearly we could not cope because we were told stay home and protect the NHS. Clearly the NHS couldn't cope. So, sorry, it's a two-part question first of all. First of all, the profanity, please.
Well, let's deal with the slogan. Since you say that, because I went on a number of marches which were all about stopping Brexit. And it was like a market research exercise for the party, because we listened to what ordinary people were saying. And they used that Anglo-Saxon word, and they shouted it, they sang it, and they cheered it. And we got the impression that lots of people felt that, and so we expressed their view. And I don't apologise.
Even though you know that it wasn't the majority view. You see, Brexiteers found that really insulting. You were basically saying that word to them, weren't you?
No, I don't think so. I think we were voicing our views in an emotional way. And, let's face it, there was deep emotions on both sides, wasn't there? And I'm sorry if the caller was offended. I didn't mean to go out my way to offend him or indeed any of the Brexiteers. But, there were passions on both sides.
But I can't imagine an Ed Davey leadership endorsing that kind of slogan in the future.
Well, I was quite supportive of that decision, so you might be surprised.
So you're not going to apologise for it at all, then?
I don't think I
Because,
will, no.
as Chris said, 25-30% of Lib Dem voters voted to leave in the referendum. They will have felt very insulted by that, won't they?
Well, no one meant to insult them.
Come on, if you say that word to somebody, it's an insult. There's no other way of painting it.
Well, I think one can paint about views about emotions and how you feel strongly about something, and it was meant partly as a way of just allowing people to express the deep emotions, and I have no problem with that.
I just wonder what you would have said if Nigel Farage had come up with a slogan saying that word to Remainers. You would have been furious, saying it debases public discourse, etc., etc.
Let you into secret about my views about Nigel Farage. He annoys me intensely anyway.
And you reported him to the police for breaking lockdown. Didn't that make you look a little bit small?
Not at all. What one was annoyed at the Dominic Cummings
It wasn't lockdown, it's quarantine, wasn't it?
Yeah. People were exceedingly cross when Dominic Cummings broke the rules.
Correct.
And, when Nigel Farage parades himself as this great, upholder of the rule of law, and then it looks like, and many people believe he did breach quarantine rules, then I think it's quite right that he should be held to account, just like everybody else.
Politically. Don't waste police time with it. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Listen, the rules should apply to everybody, shouldn't they? Same rules for you, same rules for me, same rules for Farage, same rules for Cummings.
It didn't need you, an aspirant political leader of a political party, to report him to the police. That's why I said I thought it made you look a bit small by doing that. It's the sort of thing a gobby backbencher does.
Listen, let's take the Dominic Cummings example. Dominic Cummings basically stuck his nose up to the rest of us. He did something which, if you or I had done, the police would have intervened.
I'm not arguing with you on that at all.
And so all I am saying is, when other powerful politicians who parade their virtues also break the law, appear to have broken the law, there's no reason why they shouldn't be investigated too.
We have to finish that because we're already overrunning. I could have happily gone on for another hour.
As always.
But we will see you again on Sunday the 2nd of August when we hold a debate between you and Layla Moran here in the studio. Ed, thank you very much indeed for coming in.